Hey, let me add something to that too, because when people say harm the witness, I guess my question would be, what witness are you trying to make?
Right.
Because if the witness you're trying to make is, I just want to give people fire insurance, but my faith doesn't affect any other area of my life, that's not a witness you want to demonstrate to
Right.
people. You want to demonstrate to people that the Christian faith is a non compartmentalized 365, 24/7 position where you have to deny yourself and follow Him at all costs. It should affect everything we do, not only at church, at home, at work, online, in the voting booth, everywhere. And by the way, I noticed that Jesus wasn't concerned about somehow hurting his witness. Not only was Jesus not seeker friendly, he was not disciple friendly.
Hey, friends, welcome to the Natasha Crane podcast. This week, I am celebrating the 1 year anniversary of the release of my book, When Culture Hates You, Persevering for the Common Good as Christians in a Hostile Public Square. And I could think of no better guest to have on to talk about some of these questions of cultural hostility than my good friend Frank Turek, who wrote the foreword to the book. So, in today's conversation, we talk about a whole lot of things that have happened in the last year since the book came out. It's been a rough year in a lot of ways, especially for Frank, for reasons that we'll get into in this episode. But the truth remains that Jesus said his disciples would be hated by the world. And there are good reasons for that. There are spiritual reasons for that. And we're going to get into all of that today. I want to say that if you listen to this conversation and you think, I really need to better understand how my faith should inform my politics, how my faith should inform how I engage in the public square, then I really encourage you to get a copy of my book, When Culture Hates You, because it will walk you systematically through all these questions that we're talking about today. It talks about the biblical principles, it talks about government, it talks about civics, it talks about history, it talks about everything that you need to know in order to advocate for the common good in today's world. So I encourage you to get a copy if you have not already. In the meantime, I hope that this conversation is equipping and empowering. I know you're going to find it helpful. Frank, it is so great to have you back on the show. And I say back on the show because you were with me a couple of years ago and we did an episode together that was called Understanding and Responding to Transgender Ideology. I don't know if I ever told you this, but to this day, it is the second most popular episode of all time on my podcast. So no pressure, but I am expecting you to be equally amazing today. So welcome.
I'll see what I can do. Let's talk transgenderism then.
Well, no. Today we have a different
All
topic.
right.
We're talking about hostility, but I know it's going to be just as amazing. Well, this is actually the 1 year anniversary of my book When Culture Hates You coming out, and you were gracious enough to write the foreword to that book. And it's kind of interesting looking back on the last year because I remember when the book came out, it was just after the inauguration and Donald Trump had just gotten elected. And there was kind of this vibe shift. People were saying that, maybe the culture is not so hostile toward Christians. Maybe a lot of people actually agree with us on a lot of things. Trump is elected, things are changing. And a lot of people said to me, Natasha, it's too bad for your book that Kamala didn't get elected because people would have felt that a lot more. They would have been like, man, the culture really hates us. And, we need to get this book. And I thought that was so interesting that people felt that way because they were so quick to kind of shift gears and thinking everything is okay now. So let's start there, thinking back to that time a little bit and reflecting. What would you say to the Christians who, at the time, there's this political victory for what they saw as some conservative values and they're feeling good about things? What would you say to them if they're saying, maybe the culture really doesn't hate us that much?
I would say that evil continues. And just because, say, folks on the left got demoralized a little bit, it doesn't mean that they're not going to fight back and suddenly embrace the Christian viewpoint. And, the Republican platform isn't perfectly the Christian viewpoint, don't get me wrong. It's so much closer than the Democrat platform, though. But what I've seen, particularly in the past 4 or 5 months, is the fact that when Charlie was murdered, first of all, the scriptures say that Satan is a murderer, a liar, an accuser, and a slanderer, and someone that creates confusion. So we had a murder, and what have we had since? We've had lies, accusations, slander, and confusion. Because that's what Satan's going to do, especially when you have the most watched evangelical, evangelistic event in human history, Charlie's memorial service, watched by 75 or 80,000 in the room and another 30 or 40,000 in the building next to us, and then several tens of thousands outside the building, and then 100 million watching online. And the last number I saw was 1.2 billion people as of November had watched some of that memorial service, where you had everybody from the president on down, if not talking just about Jesus, talking about the gospel, like Marco Rubio. Um, when you see that, you know that Satan's going to try and fight back. And so, what we've seen also is lawlessness, which is another characteristic of Satan. I mean, if you can't see what's going on in our country with regard to lawlessness, with regard to slander, with regard to accusations, with regard to lies, then you're not paying attention. This is just classic spiritual warfare.
Yeah, there's a reason why Jesus said that the world would hate his followers, right? John 15, 18 through 19, Jesus says, "If the world hates you, know that it has hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would
Mhm.
love you as its own. But because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you." So that doesn't change. That truth does not change, that the world is going to hate Jesus's followers just because there might be a political victory in the direction that Christians are hoping at any given time. We should celebrate the wins, right? We should be happy when there is a positive movement on some of these specific issues, but we shouldn't think that suddenly, well, it's okay that the culture actually is just fine with us, or the culture is overwhelmingly like us. And so I think Christians had a wake up call when it got to September. And you mentioned Charlie, and I want to talk about that. September comes along, Charlie Kirk is murdered, your good friend, someone that you mentored or very close to. I think probably most people listening know that you were tragically standing just a few feet away from him when this happened. And when this took place, a lot of Christians suddenly realized, wait a second, I guess a lot of stuff hasn't actually changed. And the killer himself said this. He was quoted in a lot of places saying he had texted this to his partner. "I had enough of his hatred," meaning Charlie's hatred. "Some hate can't be negotiated out." End quote. Obviously, Charlie wasn't hateful at all. So that's not the reason why he was killed, even if this person thought that. But there was some discussion at the time about why Charlie was killed. Was he killed because of his politics? Was he killed because of his religious views? If someone asked you that now, Frank, looking back and thinking about all of this, someone maybe drops in from another country who knew nothing about it and said, "Frank, why was Charlie Kirk murdered? Why did that happen?" What's your answer to that now?
Well, it is a satanic attack, quite obviously, and Charlie got his political views from his religious views, so they're intertwined. And part of the reason that I mean, it's nothing new that you've had political assassinations, quite obviously. It's nothing new you've had martyrdoms. I mean, that's been going on. There are 50 Charlie Kirks killed every day in Nigeria. I mean, this goes on all over the world. It's just that it happened here in America, and it happened to be on film, and a beloved figure who all he was doing was having conversations with people, giving people the microphone. And yet you actually have people in our society claiming Charlie Kirk was a fascist, which is the most idiotic thing to say about someone who says, "Hey, if you disagree, come to the front of the line. I'll give you the microphone. Make your case." Because that's always what fascists do, Natasha, right? They give their opponents the microphone and let them speak and listen to them and try and talk to them. Yeah, that's what fascists do. Um, Satan is a liar. And so you're going to get lies, and you're going to get slander, and you're going to get accusations, and you're going to get lawlessness, and you're going to get confusion. And that's all we've had around this. So it's really nothing new. It's just something that we need to recognize. In fact, you remember the murders that occurred just before that in Minneapolis, of all places, at that Annunciation Catholic
Right.
Church.
Yes.
And this trans person in his journal talked about, I need to kill Christians. On his gun, he had Israel must go. He was using the crucified Christ picture as target practice. He wanted to kill Christian children. And Josh Howerton down there at Lake Point Church said, "I've never seen such an overt, instance of spiritual warfare and a satanic attack that's been covered by the media, because here you have a guy that wants to murder Christians. He wants to take Israel out, and he also wants to attack the Lord himself. And the way Howerton put it, he wants to attack the Lord, the land, and the lineage of the Lord.
Hmm.
How could that be more overt? It couldn't be. C.S. Lewis famously said one of the problems with thinking about demons and demonic activity is you could go too far and think there's a demon under every rock, or you could go to the other extreme and say, well, this stuff doesn't exist at all. Oh, no, it exists. It certainly exists. We're seeing it. Just watch the news. Just watch what's been happening for the past 4.5 months.
Yeah, it was interesting because in September, the book sales for When Culture Hates You shot way up. And I just wanted to scream from the top of a building somewhere, nothing's changed. Nothing's changed in the culture. You're just more aware of it suddenly. Something
Hmm.
happened that piqued your interest, but nothing has changed since back in February when the book came out. The culture still hates Christians, right? I think that Christians, it wasn't just that we saw that Charlie was murdered so publicly and on film like you're talking about. It was also what that drew out from a lot of people, because we
Hmm.
didn't just see that event. On social media, we saw videos, horrific videos of people who were celebrating the murder of Charlie. And they were saying, this is what he gets. He's a fascist, like you're saying. This is what he deserves. He had it coming to him, right? We saw this everywhere. And I think what was so shocking to a lot of Christians is that a lot of those people didn't look like those you might expect
Hmm.
who would say those things. We saw people who were just
That's right.
everyday professors in colleges and nurses, teachers, yeah, elementary school teachers. I mean, you saw this everywhere, people
Hmm.
celebrating. And Christians said,
Yeah, you
wow,
did.
this is insane. I mean, I'm sure you saw a lot of that, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And teachers even doing this. And these people claim they're all about inclusion, tolerance, and diversity. Really? You're about inclusion, tolerance, and diversity, and you're all about love is love. And yet somebody doesn't agree with your political position and you won't include them, you won't tolerate them, you'll even celebrate their murder? Yeah, spare me. You're not at all about inclusion, tolerance, and diversity. You're playing for the wrong side, quite obviously.
Yes. And it says a lot when they are saying that he was a fascist, because, like you said, of course, Charlie was not a fascist in any way. But it's important that people understand why that word gets thrown around. Anytime you want to claim that someone is, quote unquote, imposing their values on you, that in some kind of authoritarian sense, they're wanting to politically come in and say what you can or can't do, they think you're a fascist. And they're going to use that term to make you think that he's doing something really bad by advocating for his values in the public square, right? That he's
Imagine that.
advocating for the common good. So
Yeah.
explain why from a
Well, I'm looking for your book. I've got it right here because
that
it's explained.
I was not teeing that up for a book plug. I want you to explain, Frank, why he's going to get
Hold on, hold on. I pulled my headset out looking for your book, but I got it now. All right. So this is all explained brilliantly in this book, When Culture Hates You, right here. Um,
Well, thank you for that, Frank.
yeah.
But in all seriousness, why, you have people saying, "Oh, you're a fascist," because you want to impose your Christian values on other people, and that's what they resent so much. Because ultimately, this is a question of authority, right? We've talked about this so much at our Unshaken conference we do together with Elisa Childers, that this is a matter of people resenting that there's any kind of moral authority over them versus I want to be whatever I can be and do whatever I can do. And that's why there's that underlying hatred and hostility, and not just, man, we really have some different views on it.
Yeah, it is. And what they seem to miss is that everyone's trying to impose a moral point of view in politics. All laws legislate morality. The only question is whose morality. And I don't want to legislate my morality. I don't want to legislate your morality. I want to legislate the morality. The one Thomas Jefferson said was self evident in our Declaration of Independence. The one the Apostle Paul, by the way, said the Gentiles are not of the law written on their hearts. So when people say, don't impose your morals on me, first of all, I say, why are you imposing your morals on me? Because that's what you're doing right now. You're saying I ought not impose ought nots. Why do you get to impose that ought not on me? But Actually, the better answer is this. When people say, don't impose your morals on me, I say, these aren't my morals. I didn't make this stuff up. I didn't make up the fact that murder's wrong, that abortion's wrong, that rape is wrong, that theft is wrong, that mutilating children is wrong. I didn't make up the fact that men were made for women and women were made for men. And the best way to perpetuate and stabilize society, which is the reason the government's involved in marriage to begin with, is to legally recognize that man-woman relationship over every other relationship. I didn't make any of this stuff up. It's not my morality. It just happens to be the morality. And if you don't like that morality, well, that's fine, but you don't have a problem with me. You have a problem with the creator upon whose nature all of this morality is derived. It's just called self-evident natural law. And yet they're saying, oh, I get to impose my morality, but you don't get to impose your morality, to which, again, I'm going to say it's not my morality, it's the morality.
And the irony to all of this that you're saying is that they'll call it anti-democratic, and they're talking about, political ideologies and political systems and saying, no, this
Mhm.
is fascist. But at the end of the day, all we're doing and all that Charlie was doing was advocating according to his views in the public square, which is exactly how this is intended to work in a constitutional republic, right?
That's right. And whenever they start to evoke, like, you're violating my rights, if they're atheists, I say, well, first of all, you can't justify rights at all. Because if you're an atheist, everything's just a matter of opinion. If there's no standard beyond us that we're obligated to obey, then murder is just a matter of opinion. Rape is just a matter of opinion. Theft is just a matter of opinion. But if there is a standard beyond us that we're obligated to obey, that standard can only exist if God exists, because that's God's nature. And God is the one who gives us rights, as our Declaration of Independence says. If government gave you rights, they wouldn't be rights, they'd be preferences, because a new government could come in and say, well, you don't no longer have those rights anymore. Well, then they're not rights. Rights are something you have regardless of what anybody thinks about them, because you're made in the image of God. Now, some governments will protect those rights. Other governments will take those rights away from you. The right government, the proper government, is a government that secures those rights, as our Declaration of Independence says. And by the way, that's why the colonists wanted to kick King George out of the United States or the colonies, because he was not securing their rights. And that's why the Declaration of Independence has this long list of abuses, they say. King George hasn't been doing this or has been doing this, and it's all wrong. We have the right to a new government.
Yeah, and Christians, if they understood some of the basic political background that you're talking about and just the history there in basic civics, I think we wouldn't feel so bad about advocating for the common good, because we start taking in this vocabulary. We hear that we're fascists and you're trying to impose your values on others, and we start to think that there's something wrong with that, rather than realizing, wait, no, this is our right. And not only is it our right as citizens in a constitutional republic for reasons that you were just talking about, but it's also our duty as Christians that we should want to advocate for the common good. Now, people would say, but Frank, there's nothing about a constitutional republic in the Bible. So why do you think that Christians have a responsibility in some sense to advocate for what we might call the common good? How do you answer that?
Well, because the Bible doesn't give us all these different potential forms of government. At the time in the New Testament, you had this Roman Empire. What it does, though, is gives us principles. Be salt and light, love your neighbor. These are principles, and it also gives us the principle, the purpose of government in Romans chapter 13. The main purpose of government is to punish wrongdoers and protect innocent people from evil. If you don't have the government, you're not going to have people protected from evil. If you don't punish wrongdoers, you're going to have anarchy, and a lot of people are going to get hurt, which is why James Madison famously wrote, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. You need a government because we're not angels. If we were angels, we wouldn't need a government. So the primary role of government is to protect innocent people from evil. Now, in our culture, we're able to influence the government. In fact, at the top of the org chart, theoretically anyway, in America, the people are at the top of the org chart. The government is supposed to report to the people. We, the people. So we, as the people, have to give our elected representatives guidance as to how they should govern. That's where voting comes in. You got to vote for the people that are going to support the policies that you think line up with demorality. And when we do that, what do? We protect innocent people from evil. We punish wrongdoers. And we also protect our ability to preach and live the gospel because, yeah, I know you've heard this so many times, Natasha. You'll hear pastors and others say, well, I don't get involved in politics. I just preach the gospel. To which I respond, I guess you don't think the gospel is very important then. Oh, no, why not? What do you mean? Because politics affects your ability to preach and live the gospel. If you don't think so, go to some of the countries I've been to. I've been to Iran. There's no First Baptist Church of Tehran. I checked. I've been to Saudi Arabia. There's no Calvary Chapel of Mecca. I checked. It's not there. I just got back from Egypt a few months ago. There's no Congregational Bible Church in Cairo. Why? Because they don't allow it. And here in America, we think, oh, we got freedom of religion, but that's not the norm around the world. And if we're not diligent here, we're going to lose that here too, especially if Islam continues to encroach, because Sharia law is going to rule out the freedom to preach and live the gospel. Wherever it takes over, Sharia law, wherever it takes over the gospel and the ability to preach and live it is vanquished.
There's so much to be said about what's going on with the Islamic movement and political Islam, and that's a whole other episode, I guess
Mhm.
that we could do. But I think I want Christians to just understand that not only do we have the right in this particular country to advocate for the common good and to advocate for what we believe to be an actual love for our neighbor, but we have a responsibility, biblically speaking. So this isn't just something that we can toss to the side and say, well, you can, choose to do it or choose not to do it. This is something that's actually extremely important. If you do love your neighbor, you're going to care about the quality of their lives in the context of the societies in which they live. And that's all that we're talking about here.
In fact, you have a key question in this book. See if you can remember it. What question do you ask people who are Christians who say, well, I shouldn't get involved in politics? Do you remember?
My key question.
Your
Remind
key
me of my
question.
key question.
It has to do with slavery.
Oh, I do something called the slavery test. Thanks, Frank.
Yeah,
The book
yeah.
came out a year ago, but it was written like two and a half years ago.
Yeah, right.
Well, I suggest what's called the slavery test whenever somebody has any kind of objection to getting involved in politics, to just hold it up and say, does that logic work if you were to say Christians shouldn't have worked to end slavery because, and then fill in the blank. So, for example, talking about harming your witness as a Christian, which is another objection that comes up a lot. You can say Christians shouldn't have worked to end slavery because it would have harmed our witness. Well, we would never say, yeah, that's true. We don't want to harm our witness, so we should have let slavery continue. And we don't seem to have any issues looking back in saying that and answering that. We only have those qualms today when it's about current topics. Well, I don't want to harm my witness. So I think that says a lot about our lack of courage today, is what it says. Because if you can't say it about slavery and you are saying it today, then you lack courage. And I really think it's that straightforward. We know that it was the morally right thing to do to abolish slavery at the time. So that's why we had to do it.
Hey, let me add something to that too, because when people say harm the witness, I guess my question would be, what witness are you trying to make?
Right.
Because if the witness you're trying to make is, I just want to give people fire insurance, but my faith doesn't affect any other area of my life, that's not a witness you want to demonstrate to
Right.
people. You want to demonstrate to people that the Christian faith is a non compartmentalized 365, 24/7 position where you have to deny yourself and follow him at all costs. It's not a worldview where you say, let me try and make this as non offensive as possible so I can maybe get people to accept fire insurance. And then I will never talk about these issues ever again. I'm not going to talk about them now. I'm not going to talk about it after they become Christians. I think a lot of those people probably will be the people to the whom the Lord is going to say, I never knew you. You never committed yourself to me. You're Christianity is not like a part-time deal. It's not a compartmentalized deal. It should affect everything we do, not only at church, at home, at work, online, in the voting booth, everywhere. You're a Christian 24/7, 365. And by the way, I noticed that Jesus wasn't concerned about somehow hurting his witness. Not only was Jesus not seeker friendly, he was not disciple friendly. I
It's
mean,
true.
if you think about, say, John chapter 6. He comes from Bethsaida. He does the feeding of the 5,000. He comes to Capernaum, stands in the synagogue and says, if you want to follow me, you must eat my flesh and drink my blood. And many of his disciples said, this
This
is
is
a
a
hard
hard
teaching.
saying.
Yeah, we can't follow this guy anymore. And then Jesus looks at Peter and says, "Does this offend you? Are you going to leave too?" And in a rare moment of brilliance, normally Peter stuck his foot in his mouth, but this time he said, "Lord, you have the keys to eternal life. Where else are we going to go?" Notice Jesus didn't say, "Does this offend you? Well, if this offends you, I'll forego those principles. I have these other principles I'll bring in that might be more palatable to you." No, he doesn't do that. He actually doubles down. He not only drives off disciples or seekers, he's driving off disciples too. I mean,
That's such a good point. And this
yeah.
is this is why I especially really hate that objection about, well, we just need to preach the gospel, because even when you say just, quote unquote just, it means that
Mhm,
you're trivializing what the gospel is. What
mhm,
exactly do you think the gospel is if it is that narrow? There are so many implications that flow into the gospel being true, and then implications that flow from it. And that starts with the fact that there is a God. There is a sovereign God who created the universe, who created human beings, who is the one who gives us value and meaning and purpose, who I mean, all of that is part of the gospel, because you can't get to Jesus being God if you don't know who God is in the first
mhm.
place. And so that's going to have all kinds of implications for our lives. It's going to have implications for who we are as individuals and who we are collectively as societies, and how we should treat one another, and how we define what's good, and how we define love. All of those things matter and flow from the gospel being true. And so when we just look at it so narrowly that we say, well, that can't influence all of these other things in society, I think that we are really trivializing who Jesus is and what he has done.
By the way, Paul didn't have any trouble hurting his witness. Like he's talking to Felix on his way to Rome. He's the governor at the time. And it says there, I think it's Acts 24:26. I'm trying to remember anyway. It says something like he's talking to Felix about the immorality that he has basically advanced. He's talking about righteousness to this guy. He's a governor, right? And it says that Felix became afraid and he said, "Go away. I will summon you when I need you or when I want to talk more." And he kept talking to Paul, but he was so afraid of what Paul was saying that he just kept Paul in prison for 2 years. Paul didn't stop preaching the truth about immorality or righteousness to save his witness. That was his witness. Right? That we haven't lived up to it. That's why we need a savior. And so it wasn't until Festus comes along, after Felix hands him off to Festus, that he hears Festus. I think King Agrippa's there as well. Festus hears Paul, and that's when Paul says, "I appeal to Caesar. I'm going to Rome." And that's, of course, the story after that. Then he gets shipwrecked on his way to Rome and all this. But Paul, on his way to Caesar to preach the gospel, he's talking to politicians about how immoral they are.
Yeah.
you know, and we can't harm our witness. No, you're
Maybe.
harming your witness by not talking about those things.
Exactly. Maybe we need more Christians to read the Bible. That would be helpful, right? Because you
Oh,
can't
yeah,
you can't
yeah.
read the Bible and come away thinking that we just have to, sit back and not say anything and just have this private faith between us and Jesus. Because if Jesus said to be salt and light, to be preservers and illuminators of the darkness, preservers of the world and illuminators of the darkness, we can't do that from our living rooms, just sitting there,
Hmm.
having this silent, quiet faith. And that's a lot of what we've talked about in the Unshaken conferences that we do, is just trying to get Christians to realize, hey, this is something that requires us to get out in the public square and to advocate for righteousness. And Frank, you did not miss a beat in doing that after Charlie got murdered. I just to be completely honest, at the time, I was worried about you because you were right back on the road. You were doing college events again immediately after that happened. And, I think I even reached out to you and said, hey, are you okay? Because it seems like you should take some time to grieve and to pause. And I know it's really important to you to not do that and keep going. Why was that? Why did you keep going?
Two reasons, because they were already, well, three reasons. They were already scheduled. Um, and the people that would come to these events were hurting themselves, right? And the whole thing shifted to, if God, why evil? Why did God allow Charlie to die? Uh, and secondly, I know Charlie would want us to continue. And I think just Jesus wants us to continue, right? So we had an event scheduled at a university 1 week after he was murdered, and all we needed to do was get security to make sure we could do it. So we did, and then we had several other events. We had, I don't know, 8 or 9 in a couple of months at colleges, because hearts are tender now. You can't not do it when you don't want that period to pass. It's an opportunity to, uh, have people be open to the message that they weren't open to prior to his murder, and, I did notice a shift in the questions. They went prior to his murder, we had more skeptical questions. After his murder, we had more evangelistic questions, such as, "How do I get my non-Christian friend to become a Christian?" Right? So people were more open to the message, and we've seen Bible sales are up, church attendance is up. Some of that was happening prior to Charlie's martyrdom, but I think it accelerated it when he was martyred, and it's still I had a conversation with a guy today, an older guy, he was like, I'm still torn up about this." And of course, we should be. It was an awful event, but that doesn't mean we can just, um, not do what we need to do. Uh, well, and we did I did take some time off, like, around Christmas and, you know, say a month, I didn't really travel anywhere, so that was good because I was tired. Going back out, uh, next week, we're going to Elon, NC State, Northern Florida University on February I don't know when this is gonna air, but it's February 10, 11, and 12. And then we got a bunch of other schedule. We're even going back to Utah Valley University,
I saw
uh,
that.
on March 25th. I
Was
don't know
that a
how I'm gonna
difficult
react to being there.
was that a
What's that?
difficult decision to go back there?
No, because we gotta put a stake in the ground, you know? We that's where it happened, so we're not gonna let Satan win there. Greg Laurie's already been there. He was there last month doing a crusade. Uh, no, we should they invited me, so we should go.
Have
I
you
heard
Go ahead.
I already asked some others to join me. I don't know if it'll happen, but we'll see.
Have you noticed any changes as time goes on? Maybe at the beginning when you went out to colleges, people were more shaken up by everything that had happened, and so you saw that shift, and then you get further away from it, it kinda goes back to how it used to be. Has that happened yet, or do you still feel
I
like it's
I
about the
can't tell
same?
yet. I can't tell yet because the last event we had was at Boise State in late November, so it's been over 2 months. So the first event will be next week here in, North Carolina. So we'll see. I don't know how you know, how the crowd's gonna change, if at all, we'll see.
Well, I know that you have talked about how this has impacted you in terms of just your own security. And so I want to throw that out to people. Talk a little bit about how the security needs have changed in order for you to get out and do the work that you're doing, to talk to people about the truth of scripture and how that applies in the public square. Talk a little bit about what that's required of you and how that's changed since Charlie and your needs now.
Well, first of all, our events are always indoors because I always give a presentation using usually PowerPoint or something, so I've never done I've spoken to people outdoors, but not like Charlie was doing. Outdoors, much harder to control, as you know, although that should have been controlled at Utah Valley because the Utah University police said, "Oh, we got the roofs." No, they didn't have the roofs. Someone ought to be charged with something, negligence or something, because they didn't have the roofs, quite obviously. Um, but we're indoors, and so we have a security team now that whenever we go to a college, it's basically an extra $10,000 to go, um, because we have 4 security team, 4-member team, and, we have metal detectors um, and of course, you gotta, pay for hotels and travel and meals and all that. So it's like an extra $10,000 every time we go. That's an additional expense. Used to cost us about $5,000, when you add up all the travel and the videographer and the hotels and, all that. Now it's like $15,000. But our donors have graciously stepped up to fund that because they know it. The show must go on. You don't stop doing it.
And if people are
Uh,
listening who feel led to contribute to that, what's the best way for people to do that?
if they go to crossexamined.org, cross examined with a D on the end of it, .org, and click on donate. 100% of your donations go to ministry, 0% to buildings. We don't have any buildings. We work out of our homes and we go to where the students are. So you're not paying for overhead.
Well, I encourage anyone, if you're able and you feel led to support Frank and what they're doing at Cross Examine, because they're doing a lot of amazing work. And as you can hear, Frank is out on the road and he is engaging with so many people, reaching thousands and thousands in the same way that Charlie was. And so I really encourage you to support him. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about, we're talking about hostility and hatred today. And there's another kind of hostility that I see a lot in the culture. And this one is specifically toward Christians who voted for Trump. And this hostility actually comes from believers and non-believers. And you and I, we both voted for Trump. And so, we've talked a lot about why that's the case. You've done that on your platform. I've done it on mine. We've talked about it at our conferences. But there's still a lot of people today who are scratching their heads and going, how can a Christian have voted for Trump? And they're not just looking at that and saying, that's really weird. I don't understand, how people got to that position. There's a lot of actual hostility and resentment. And so, we did talk about this a lot at the time of the election, but just briefly, as a Christian, why did you feel that you needed to vote for Trump over Kamala? What is that case, just for those who maybe
Mhm.
weren't listening back at the time? What was your case for that?
Well, first of all, I didn't vote for Trump in the primaries.
Neither did I.
Yeah. So I didn't think Trump was the best candidate for the presidency due to obvious flaws that he has. But once it came down to a general election where you had a platform from the Republicans and a platform from the Democrats that couldn't be more opposed now, whether you're talking about abortion, whether you're talking about mutilating children prior to, 18, this gender affirming care nonsense, whether you're talking about borders being open, drugs coming across the border, whether you're talking about the wokeification of the military rather than being combat ready. We're going to be involved in all this woke nonsense and trying to be diverse rather than being effective. Uh, all of these things, and there's many more issues, quite obviously, but all of these things are important matters. And when Jesus went after the politicians of his day, and they were the Pharisees, yes, Jesus was involved in politics. He said, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees! You're tithing your spices, but you're neglecting the more important matters of the law." Justice, he started with. Well, justice is what a government's all about, making sure that wrongdoing is punished and innocent people are protected. When you have a government that won't protect life in the womb, that won't protect children from these this crazy ideology where we think cutting up and sterilizing a child is in their best interest. When you have a government that won't protect its borders, when you have a government that will basically degrade its own police force and military with all sorts of non-essential, non-merit based issues. When you have a government that does all this, they are neglecting why you have a government to begin with, and that is to protect innocent people from evil by punishing wrongdoers. Instead of punishing wrongdoers, the Democrat platform largely applauds wrongdoers and advances wrongdoing in abortion, in the so-called gender affirming care, in leaving the border open, which brings in so many other issues. There's 300,000 missing girls in our country due to the open border. How many terrorists came across? We have no idea. So it was really no choice from a policy perspective. And it's a policy perspective that if you have a choice between a personality and a policy, you can have a great personality, but if their policies are wrong, what's the point? Do I think character is important? Of course I do. I'd love to have a great personality and a great policy. But if
Exactly.
I have to choose one or the other, give me the policy. That's why I put them in there.
Yes.
In fact, an analogy might be um, if you have to have a very delicate brain surgery or heart surgery or something, what's going to be the criteria that you pick a surgeon and his or her team? It's going to be how good they can do the surgery, right? It's not going to be whether they have a great bedside manner. You hope they have that. But
Sure.
if you have to choose between a successful surgery and a good bedside manner, which one you're going to choose? You're going to choose the surgery every time. You're going to say, I'm going to go with the team. I don't care if the head guy's a jerk. I'm going with the team that's going to save my life.
Right.
And it's safe that's what presidential politics often is. At the end of the day, you might have two personalities you don't like. Okay, which one is going to fulfill the biblical mandate to punish wrongdoers and protect innocent people from evil? That's your number one priority. That's why you have a government. So that's why I voted for Trump. But let me say this: I understand why people don't like Trump. And half the times Trump speaks, I'm cringing. I'm going, oh, come on. What? This is just narcissism. This is exaggeration. And the other half of the time, he's saying funny stuff.
Yes.
So he's quite entertaining, quite obviously. And let me say one other thing, and I think this is very important with regard to this. I don't think people realize the level to which they've been propagandized. Actually, it works both ways. Both sides of the aisle put out propaganda, quite obviously. But you've seen a lot with this ICE stuff now, where you have all these stills. In fact, I reminded this one still where it looks like an ICE agent was about to hurt a guy who was doing this, when if you look at the film, what the guy had just done, this agitator had grabbed the gun of the ICE agent and was pulling it away from him. And when the ICE agent pulled it back, he went like this. It was the agitator's fault, not the ICE guy's fault. Yet this is put out as ICE is being somehow Nazi-like. It's propaganda. Here's the point. The point is that you don't judge an entire force by isolated examples and say, oh, if this agent did something wrong, they're all Nazis. That would be like us saying, because we've had 3 trans shooters in the past 2 years. One of them was Charlie. One of them was that Annunciation Church. And another one was that church in Nashville. And there may be several others that I can't think of right now. That would be like someone saying, because those 3 trans people shot other people, all trans people are evil. That's not true. You don't reason from isolated examples and apply the characteristics of the isolated example to the whole population. That's not true. That's not how you even do social science research. You have to get survey data of the entire group, accurate survey data, to reveal whether the organization is good or bad. And if you look at ICE, you look at the police, you look at the military, you look at any of these institutions, you're going to see that overall they do their jobs well. They are engaged with thousands, if not millions of people a year. And what we're propagandized by is one incident we see, and much of that is taken out of context, as I mentioned, and then we apply what we think we see to the entire ICE force or the entire police force. And that's just not true. It's propaganda. One last thing. I know I'm going on here, but I remember during the George Floyd situation, I was talking to somebody who was basically saying defund the police, right, as a result of this. And I asked her, I said, how many unarmed blacks do you think nationwide the police have shot in 2019? This is just before George Floyd. She said thousands. I said, you know what the answer is? 9. And you know how many unarmed whites they shot? 19. That's the government's own data. And when we say unarmed, sometimes they didn't have a gun, but they may have had a brick or something, right? And so this idea that people get in their heads, they see what happened to George Floyd, and let's assume what happened there. I mean, the guy was convicted. Let's assume what he did was wrong. They apply that to all the police. That is illegitimate. It's false. And yet people believe it. And so when they see something they think is wrong in the Trump administration, they apply that to everybody. And how could you ever vote for such a thing when we could easily do the same thing on the other side of the aisle, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So that's propaganda. That's not how you make decisions. That's not how you decide whether or not an organization or a group of law enforcement people or a party is good or bad. You need more data than that.
I agree completely, and the propaganda is very effective. That's the challenge, right? I was talking with a group of Christians recently, and the subject of ICE came up and what's going on in Minnesota, and one of my friends here in this group, she was quite progressive, and we know that we're on very opposite ends of the political spectrum in that way. And it was just interesting to kind of see how we were processing this question differently because someone raised, the question in the group, well, how should Christians think about what's going on in Minnesota? And my friend was very, very upset and clearly had a heart for, the people involved. And she was speaking to the individual examples that she had seen and the news and, what she perceived as the children who were being hurt by this. And it occurred to me that I think progressives and conservatives tend to focus on very different levels of the issue. So that a lot of times progressives are looking at it from an individual perspective, individual case studies, you might say. So you see things that come out in the news and you're affected by that, rightly so. You feel for the people who are involved, but it is sort of these isolated examples. Whereas, and I kind of felt like a robot in that situation, to be honest, because I was thinking, I haven't watched every video of everything that everyone is talking about because that's not going to tell me whether or not I support an overall initiative to go in to a sanctuary city that is obstructing the law and actually enforcing the things that need to be enforced. That's not going to tell me if that is the right thing to do. And so I'm thinking of it from a principle perspective. In principle, I believe that our country has borders, that we are a sovereign nation who should be protecting those borders for the people on the inside. And that if you are here illegally, you have broken the law, and it is our right and often our duty to protect people, to deport people. So in principle, this is what I would say. And I shared something on Facebook recently where I suggested to people that, if you're having a lot of conversations or maybe disagreements or arguments with people over the whole ICE thing, to step back from the individual examples and say, well, let me just ask, do you think that we should have an open border? Do you think that this country should be deporting people who are illegal? Because in my experience, the vast, vast majority of those who are really concerned about the tactics, what they're saying are the tactics and the execution, the propaganda, as you're saying, when you step back and you ask them, do you think we should be deporting people if it was handled in a way that you think is, tactically correct? They probably say no, or, maybe the worst of the worst. But it's more of a question of principle that
Mhm.
conservatives tend to come back to as opposed to those individual case studies. Is that the same in your experience, or
Yeah,
have you seen
and
something different?
also I would say, maybe to say it more succinctly on my part, you don't evaluate anyone or any large group like ICE or your police force on exceptions. You evaluate them on the rule, on what normally happens most of the time. And our friend Jay Warner Wallace has great data on this. He'll show you that out of millions of police interactions with citizens, extremely low incidences occur. I mean, incidents occur very extremely uh, at a very low level, well below 1%, point zero zero something percent. Is there ever a altercation between a police officer and a citizen? And even fewer instances where the police officer acted improperly. And yet we see an exception to that. What we think is an exception, quite often it's a propaganda piece. It's not an exception because they're not showing you the whole context. But we see an exception. We go, the whole defund the police, which is the dumbest political idea probably in the past 200 years.
Yeah.
Because without police, you don't have a civilization. You don't have a rule of law. You don't have the freedoms that you enjoy now. You don't even have an economy, because if you can't put yourself out there without fear of your products or services being stolen, you're never going to risk it. So people, they don't think this through. You need a police force. In fact, Jim's always fond of saying this, and he's absolutely right. The foundation of any civilization from a vocational perspective is law enforcement. If you don't have law enforcement, You don't have a free market because gangs can come in and take your money, take your stuff, right? You don't have safety on the roads. You don't have safety in your home. You don't have safety anywhere. If you don't have safety, you'll never risk anything. You'll never have an economy. You'll never be able to do anything enjoyable because there's always a danger of people just taking it from you without consequence.
For a
And
lot.
that's why when I see law enforcement, I say, hey, thank you for your service. Without you, there's nothing. We don't have any of this. And yet, notice that's one of Satan's characteristics is he's advocating lawlessness. What's going on even if there are instances where ICE acts improperly, even if that is happening and it's illegitimate because they are acting improperly, which I don't think in most cases they are. I think they're being agitated. I mean, can you imagine going there? This is not even your home, and you're dressed in your gear, which identifies you as ICE, and there are agitators all around you, many of whom may have a gun. What kind of mindset are you going to have? You're going to be almost trigger happy, right? Because you got to protect yourself. So, um, I again, we don't make these kinds of judgments based on exceptions, and without law enforcement, all these laws, by the way, are democratically decided. Without law enforcement, we don't have a country. We don't have freedoms. We're not secure. We might even lose our lives, and yet people are so idiotic in their protests on this.
Well, and I think for a lot of people, this is sort of the nail in the coffin against people who voted for Trump because they see this as a Trump initiative, right? They're saying it's Trump with his authoritarian nature who is going in to this state and he's picking it for political reasons and he's going in to crack down. He's doing all this. He's the one that people elected in this country to crack down on these laws and to deal with the crisis. We have a crisis that was put in place by the previous administration, and we can't forget about that. It's going to be somewhat messy, and to try to fix something that this scale that has happened because of the open borders that we've had in the past is going to be messy sometimes. And we
Well,
don't celebrate that. We don't say,
no,
oh well, it's going to be messy, so we wipe our hands clean of this because we know it's going to be a problem. We hope that everything is executed perfectly. Nothing's ever going to be executed perfectly, but that's why as a Christian, when I'm in these conversations with people, I want to step back and talk about the principles behind it. Can we agree on these basic things about what the Bible teaches, that yes, a country should have borders, that this is not something that the Bible speaks about, like we're not just supposed to accept everyone in and say, oh, you can do whatever you want, that assimilation is somehow bad. Like none of that is true. And so I like to try to get people to think about that at that level. And because so many people have kind of gotten to this point of saying, like, how dare you? Have you seen what's going on in Minneapolis? This is because of people like you who voted for Trump. And overwhelmingly, it's a lot of conservative Christians who helped to put Trump in power. This is where people are getting even more hostile, I think, than they were before. And I've seen a lot of this online because of this specific scenario that's happening in
and
Minneapolis.
what I say to them when they say, "Have you seen what's happening in Minnesota?" I say, "No, and neither have you." Because you're not on the ground. You don't see all the stuff that's going on. You don't see all the agitation going on. You're seeing a lot of propaganda is what you're seeing. Okay. Sure. Maybe we see some reports that have more context, but many of the times they don't. And notice we don't have this problem in Florida. You know why we're having it in Minnesota is because Waltz and Fry and these other people up there, Keith Ellison, they release criminals from the jails if they're illegal so ICE won't deport them. And then ICE needs to go out into the community and track them down. And when you don't punish wrongdoers, you know who you punish? The innocent. Because when you don't punish wrongdoers, the wrongdoers hurt the innocent. And so Waltz and Fry and Ellison should all resign because they are not upholding their number one duty to punish wrongdoers and protect the innocent. They're doing the opposite. So it's maddening when this kind of thing happens. Unfortunately, since we're not taught logic anymore, and we get all of our information in a few second video on the glowing rectangle, we think we know what's going on. No, we don't really know what's going on. If you look at the stats of what's going on, most law enforcement most of the time is doing it right. Are there exceptions? Of course, as you said, but you prosecute those individually. You don't say, Down with ICE, down with the police. That's childish. That's toddler-like. Wake up.
And everyone thinks they're an expert on everything that's happening, right? There
Yeah,
have been when I talked about this on social media, and there were lots of people who were like, "But what about this? And did you see this? And this and this?" All these examples. I don't have time to run down every example and dig
right.
into it, and I'm not going to necessarily get down to the facts of the situation like anybody else. And yet, when I have looked up some of these things, it's like, "Oh, yeah, but there's more context. Did you see this? Did you understand what was going on behind it?" And so I just encourage people to not get so wrapped up in some of the emotion of it. That's not to say, again, we don't want to be robots and say that there aren't actual people who have been hurt, that there aren't families hurting, that there haven't been mistakes made. We're not saying any of that, but we are saying to take a step back, get back to principles, and understand that this is not something, when you look at it from the overarching reason for them being there in Minneapolis, this is not something that is anti-biblical as a lot of people are making it sound. So
No, let me say one other thing about this. Well, two, Pastor Josh Howerton just put out a tweet, maybe we can put it in the show notes, of at least a dozen propaganda, uh, either videos or stills, where they were reported as one thing when in reality they're exactly the opposite.
we'll put a link to
That will
that.
show you, yeah, you're in a propaganda war right there. Secondly, even if Trump deports 3,000 people a day, that that will be almost 4 million a year, and he's got 3 more years. That'll be 12 million people. There's 35 million illegals in our country. Okay, he's going to make hardly a dent in it, and and that's his job. He's just enforcing the law. If you want to change the law, fine, go ahead, change the law, go through Congress, change the law. But his job is to execute the laws. That's what the executive branch is supposed to do. And I think another thing that Christians don't seem to get, Natasha, is they don't realize that there are different commands for government than there are for individuals,
Yes, this is a
right?
huge one. Oh, this one's huge. Yeah,
Go
expand on
ahead,
that.
unpack
No,
some of it,
no,
because
Frank, you're the guest. Go for it. I'm just
well,
like, yes, this is such an important point.
let's just talk of one of them. People say, "What about turn the other cheek and all this?" Well, turn the other cheek is, if you're an individual, you don't need to retaliate on an insult. But it doesn't mean if you're an individual, if someone wants to kill you, you have to let them. In fact, when Jesus was struck on the cheek, he didn't turn the other cheek. He said, "Who struck me?" Right? So turn the other cheek is about insults. It's a command to individuals to say you don't need to escalate an insult war. But turn the other cheek is not a command to governments. The command to government is to punish the wrongdoer and protect innocent people from evil. If the government turned the other cheek on severe crimes, the government couldn't do what it's supposed to do, and innocent people would get hurt. And so people need to understand this. In fact, Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, I saw him. He said this beautifully today. He was talking about how the Pope was trying to say it's wrong to deport people. And Mike Johnson said, "I'm not sure the Pope understands the biblical principle here, that borders are a good thing. And there is a difference between a command to a person, like welcome the sojourner, and have a border and protect innocent people from evil and punish wrongdoers." By the way, in the Old Testament, the Old Testament distinguishes between legal and illegal immigrant. And in both cases, whoever it is supposed to assimilate into the culture. So if they're a legal immigrant, they're supposed to assimilate. If they don't adopt Israeli values, they're kicked out. In fact, part of the Canaanite thing was driving people out of the land because they wouldn't assimilate to the values. And when it comes to illegal immigration, the Bible doesn't tell you whether you have to deport them or not. But of course, governments have the right to deport people if they feel that that individual shouldn't be here or is not going to assimilate into our values, because you don't have the right to go to any country you want to go to. Every country has the right to close its borders and to say, no, we're going to let these people in or not these people in. That's up to each individual company or country. I mean, if someone came into your house and said, "Hey, I'm going to take the extra bedroom," you would say, "Well, you don't have a right to be here." Suppose they said, "Well, no, I do. And not only that, you're going to have to start living by my rules now." You're going to go, "What?" First of all, you're not welcome here. But secondly, even if you were, I don't live by your rules. You live by mine. This is my house. So it's just so convoluted. People throw out Bible verses out of context and they don't know what they're teaching, and they confuse all this.
Yeah, I see that all the time, which is why when you brought that up, I was like, yes, so many people, you get, it's like the jurisdiction of government and the individual, right? Like these get completely confused. If you confuse them, then you're going to really get government wrong. And you're going to think the government's doing a whole lot of stuff that the government shouldn't do if you're thinking that all the commands to individuals in the Bible are applying to government in its role. And so that's a good question to ask if you're ever in a conversation with people and they're starting to say, yeah, but the Bible says this or that. First thing in the back of your mindset, but is that applicable to the individual or is that to the government or both? But who is this applicable to? So it's an
Yeah,
important
yeah.
thing to
Remember,
ask.
there are three institutions that God created. He created government, he created the family, and he created the church. And they have different commands. I mean, this is it's common sense, right? I mean, in your own house, you have different commands for different people, right? You're gonna have different commands for an adult than you would a child, okay? Because they're at different levels of maturity. I mean, the same thing is true in out in the world. There's different functions that God created these different organizations for different functions. He created the church to do one thing and the government to do another and the family to do another. And they have different regulations or commands surrounding them.
So I want to end by just telling people, this when we're talking about Trump and we're talking about hostility toward people who voted for Trump, we're not sitting here saying that we think that Trump is the best president we've ever had or could ever have. We're not defending him per se in that. We are saying that both of us believe that when it was a competition for the White House between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, that from a Christian perspective of what the purpose of government is to promote the good and restrain the evil, that when you look at the platforms, it was clearly a choice that it wasn't going to be Kamala, and the best way of ensuring that wasn't going to happen was voting for Donald Trump. And people have different feelings, the degree to which they're happy with Trump at this point. And I would just say from my perspective, I was asked this recently by someone, so what do you make of Trump at this point? There are so many things that he has said and done, on social media, the things that he does that I just shake my head and I think this is crazy. Like he says some crazy stuff. He's over the top. He says some things that are just outright awful sometimes.
Hmm.
Like Frank, like you said, sometimes it's funny and I kind of laugh and it's humorous, but at the same time, he shouldn't be saying those things as president. And so I don't love those things. But as a Christian, I am not going to look at the hostility that people are throwing my way because I chose Trump over Kamala and think, man, I did something wrong here. I should have gone with the other platform because we were talking about character earlier. Even if Kamala has, great character in some particular area, maybe she's a really cheerful person. If she's cheerful as she walks around and celebrates the opening of a new Planned Parenthood clinic where they're going to be murdering unborn babies, that's not good character. You might think
That's
that,
right.
being cheerfulness out in isolation, that sounds like a good thing, but what are you being cheerful about, for example? And you can say that about anything. If you're advocating for the murder of babies, then how great is your character? That's not to say that Trump has been consistent on abortion or anything like that. But again, we're talking about relative degrees between these. So,
Right. Well, Trump has not come out for the government to pay for abortion up to the moment of birth, like Kamala has. But it's not even. It wasn't even just Trump, Kamala. When you're voting for president, you're not voting for one person. You're voting for 5,000 people to go to Washington and implement an agenda, a platform. And if you notice, the folks that Trump has around him, most of them, I think, are doing a good job. I mean, you've got RFK, who's, I think, trying to get us healthy again. You've got Pete Hegseth, who's now talking about let's do combat readiness rather than all this woke nonsense. You've got Marco Rubio, who has like every job known to man now. you know, he's involved in everything. So these are quality people. You've got Tom Homan on the border, which and Kristi Noem. People are all upset about Kristi Noem. She is light years better than Mayorkas, who was actually impeached because he wouldn't close the border. And all this nonsense, by the way, about, oh, we need to change the law to close the border. No, you don't. You need to enforce the laws we already have. Trump closed the border in about 15 minutes after he took office. It's all propaganda when you hear, oh, we can't close the border. We need new legislation. No, you don't. Just enforce the laws you already have.
right. Well, friends, there will always be hostility toward Christians. It doesn't matter who's in office. It doesn't matter what political victories or defeats there are. People will always hate Christians. There will always be hostility toward Christians. Jesus warned us as much because righteousness is despised by a fallen world. The Bible is very clear on this. So when you're advocating for what is actually good in the eyes of God and the culture thinks that's evil or vice versa, people are going to hate you for it. And so we can expect that, but we need to be biblically solid, understand what scripture says so that we can actually advocate in the right way. Frank, before we wrap up here, I know you have a lot of resources that people can make use of. There are so many. So I just want you to highlight what you think would be most important for people to know about and start with Milo's Mission, because this is the newest book that you've worked on with Brave Books, and it's a kid's book. People are always asking about kids' books, right? So this is an actual kids book that you have done with Brave Books. Tell us about that, and then highlight some of the other resources that you think are especially important for people given our topic today.
Yeah, I thought I had it. It's over there. I can't grab it right now. But Milo's Mission is a book for kids. It's put out by Brave Books. I'm a co-author on it. And if they go to bravebooks.com/Frank, they're going to see this book. And if you sign up for Brave Books, you get like a new book every month. And I've got grandkids now. Grandkids love these books because they're colorful. They teach them a story. Moral of the story is always like a good fruit of the spirit kind of story or responsibility. It could be about love. It could be about character. It could be about integrity. It could be about any one of a number of things: faith, hope, love, all those things. And it teaches kids at a very young age Christian principles. So that's Milo's Mission. And there's many other books. There's several other people that have written books with them. So go to bravebooks.com/Frank. And then, of course, our website, crossexamine.org, crossexamine with a D on the end of it, on the end of it.org. We also do two podcasts a week, the I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist podcast, and our YouTube channel, Cross Examine. We have several curricula and online courses too. If they go to crossexamine.org, they can see those. We even have curricula and online courses for kids all the way down to second grade to try and teach them logic, to try and teach them the evidence for Christianity. We basically have I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist down to the second grade. So we've got a lot going on that uh, we try and equip people with, especially in this hostile culture. And they can also pick up this book too. This is one of my favorites of all time. It's called When Culture Hates You. You see, I wrote the foreword. There it is right there. Okay. From Natasha Crane. There you go.
Well, thank you, Frank. Thanks for the conversation today. Really appreciate everything you're doing. You have just enormous, enormously helpful resources, all the ones that you mentioned, much more. I'll be sure to put links to everything in the show notes. Thank you for your time today. Great having
Hey,
you.
thanks for having me, Natasha. It's always great being with you. I hope we're going to do another Unshaken soon. I know we're working on
Yes,
that.
we're working on it. We
All
will
right, good.
we'll let everyone know when we have an update on that, but Unshaken's not dead.
Good.
All right. Thanks everyone.
Thanks.